Saudi Arabia has always been rare hills. Now, Saudi Arabia is a monarchy. Saudi Arabia is one of the few countries around the world that still has a monarchy for a government. In this case, that means Saudi Arabia has a king, it has princes, and they are in control of the government. Saudi Arabia is also one of the only countries in the world that has enacted Sharia law. Basically, versions of the law that are mainly based upon the Muslim religion, based upon Islam. And thus, by doing so, Sharia law actually implements laws that prohibit, for example, women from driving cars, from voting, from having equal rights as men. Not only that, but it also punishes people based on what they do, how they do it, whether or not they violate the Quran, which is what Islam is based upon. Now, putting these two things together, we can clearly see that Saudi Arabia is a rare event, is a rare case in terms of countries because of what they have, because of their type of government, and because of the laws they enforce. Now, because of these two things, because of these two factors, we can see, public outcry in Saudi Arabia has never been higher, as of now, because of the recent Arab Spring revolutions. Now, for example, in Saudi Arabia, just recently, according to a recent CNN article, that Saudi Arabians are actually revolting against the government, that they've actually been protesting against the Saudi Arabian government. And the Saudi Arabian government has actually taken actions against these people. Even just recently, as with the outbreak of the revolution in Syria, the outbreak of the revolution in Libya. Now, that actually brings me to the question of, is reform on the way in Saudi Arabia? To which my answer is yes. Because first, there's increased public criticism of the government. Secondly, that Saudi Arabia itself, the government, has drawn support away from countries that have continually oppressed its people. And third, that Saudi Arabia has actually implemented changes so far. Now, as to my first area of analysis about how individuals, how the public in Saudi Arabia have become increasingly discontent about the direction that the country is taking, about what the government is doing. Now, as I've said before in a recent CNN article, that people are up in arms against the Syrian government, that they've been protesting, they've been speaking out against the Saudi Arabian government because of its oppressive regime, because of its attitude towards certain laws, towards certain activities. Because of all of this, the public in Saudi Arabia has been speaking out against the government itself. And by doing so, and as a result of this, the Saudi Arabian government has actually been cracking down upon the public itself. But the international community has frowned upon these actions as they've done before in Libya, as they're planning to do in Syria. And by doing so, we can see that the Saudi Arabian government is in a lot of hot water. That because they've been doing these actions, because they've been doing such things to their people, because they've been doing such things to these people, that bad things are on the way if they do not shape up their act, if they don't reform their status and their current attitudes towards basically law in itself. So that is simply one example of why reform is on the way. Because of the public's increased criticism of the government, and because the international community is cracking down on the government. Now, on to my second area of analysis, which is that the Saudi Arabian government has actually taken away support from countries that do the same as they do. So, for example, in a recent Al Jazeera article, Saudi Arabia has actually taken away support from Syria, which has been shown to be harassing its citizens, been violating civil rights. And despite this fact that Saudi Arabia in itself is hypocritical for taking away support from Syria, because as according to a Amnesty International report on civil rights abroad, Saudi Arabia has been ranked as one of the countries with the least amount of civil rights. So, the fact that Saudi Arabia has taken away their support from Syria, which has been an ally of Saudi Arabia for quite some time, that we can see that clear reform is on the way because Saudi Arabia has changed its perspective. that Saudi Arabia has changed its ideals and whatnot. So thus, because of that, we can see that there's clearly change on the way. And finally, as to my final area of analysis, which is that Saudi Arabia has actually implemented these changes. Now, as according to a recent CNN article, Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah has actually implemented changes in order to combat public criticisms. So, for example, King Abdullah has actually legalized voting for women in Saudi Arabia, which is absolutely revolutionary. As according to Sharia law, women aren't even supposed to walk on the same roads as men. So now that the fact that women are allowed to vote in the government, that they're allowed to make decisions pertaining to the government, is absolutely revolutionary, especially for the government of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, hang up, please.
Now, that also brings me to an example of how a judge in Saudi Arabia had ruled that a woman be sentenced to several whips and lashes for driving a car, but King Abdullah himself had actually pardoned a woman, and this woman is now in fact allowed to drive a car, which shows that progress is on the way in Saudi Arabia. Progress is in effect in Saudi Arabia. Now, once again, going over the fact that, first of all, there's public upheaval in Saudi Arabia. Secondly, that Saudi Arabia has changed its stances throughout the international community, throughout the world. And third, that Saudi Arabia is in itself already enacting changes. That reform is clearly on the way for Saudi Arabia. Thank you.